The final fast hack that's in Fast This Way is called prebiotic fiber. And again, this makes a lot of the hair shirt fasters very angry because saying, well, Dave, there were some calories in that and calories break a fast. I'm like, no, these calories did not raise insulin, which is a hallmark of fasting, and they did not raise mTOR, which is a hallmark of fasting. And I've interviewed several experts from various fields of mitochondrial biology who say, yeah, what you're proposing here doesn't break the fast because it allows autophagy, this process of cleaning up your cells, to stay going. So this is cool. It means that you can get the benefits of the fast without having to think about food all the time.
Welcome to the Maximus podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Sepah. As a clinical psychologist, medical school professor, and CEO, I specialize in helping men be better in mind, body, and masculinity. On this podcast, I interview extraordinary men as a clinician would, hearing their come-up stories of how they became the men that they are today, and having them share their secrets of actionable advice on how to look, feel, and perform your best. All right, we are back with Dave Asprey, biohacker extraordinaire and executive chairman of Bulletproof. And in part one, Making the Man of this podcast, we got to hear some fascinating behind the scenes stories of Dave's early personal health experiences that got him interested in science and systems biology, and that led him to get into the field of biohacking by writing the Bulletproof executive blog, and then starting, of course, the company Bulletproof, which is famous for innovating on multiple things, but most famous for Bulletproof coffee. And has written 3 previous New York Times bestseller, and now has his 4th New York Times bestseller, Fast This Way. So in this part 2, great cover there as well. We want to deep dive a little bit into this book and fasting, so we can get sort of very actionable advice for our audience who has probably heard a lot about fasting, may have tried it, may not have tried it, but to get the down low from you, arguably one of the experts on fasting, on how this can help them. So why don't we just start off with that? Why don't you tell our audience kind of the why? Why should they fast? Obviously, if you're kind of metabolically unhealthy, there's some clear benefits. But I'm sure there's a lot of our audience too who may not have weight to lose, maybe otherwise generally healthy. I'm curious if you think they should fast as well.
You can fast for weight loss, but it's not the primary reason you do it. You fast for energy. And when your body does a better job of combining about 30 pounds of air and however much food you eat or don't eat, maybe fat that's stored in your body, when it combines those things to make electrons, if you're good at that process, you have energy. If you're bad at that process, you have less energy and you may get fat, or you may not look fat, but you store fat around your organs, which is even more dangerous. So even if you don't have weight to lose, controlling the amount of time that you let your body take its digestion systems and turn it on you to digest old tissues, old cells, debris, things like that, it's fundamental to having more energy and living a long time. So it's not a weight loss thing, but if you have weight to lose, you'll lose weight.
That's great. I'm curious too about how sort of fasting contrasts with the old school, especially I would say bodybuilder approach, where they're constantly trying to eat 6 small meals a day. They're trying to get protein every 3 hours. They're ingesting extra leucine to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. It almost seems contrary to the whole fasting, philosophy. Is that reconcilable, or how do you think about that versus fasting?
It is somewhat reconcilable. The New York Times once wrote this article that said I was almost muscular, which made me really happy because that's what you want to be if you're going to live a very long time. And if you are carrying excess muscle mass and using those bodybuilding techniques to do it, you're burning your candle at both ends, and you are likely causing diseases of aging. And the reason for this is a compound called mTOR. And mTOR is a signaling molecule that tells your body to grow. And if you eat protein every couple hours, the way a bodybuilder is trained to do, especially in older techniques, your mTOR levels will always be high. There'll always be protein available in order to build that protein. The problem is you never clean out the old stuff. And when mTOR is chronically elevated, and it gets raised by carbohydrates, but more by protein, what you end up with is this constant grow situation, which is definitely a cancer kind of thing. Now, if you want to put on muscle, though, the deal is you don't need to always have high mTOR. If you want to live a long time, you want low mTOR, But if you have low mTOR, then you die of a hip fracture because you're frail and you have vegan-sized pants, those tiny little stick legs. And you don't want that either. So the solution is to work with this amazing molecule. And what you want to do is compress it like a spring. The lower it goes, the higher it'll go when you raise it up again. And in Fast This Way, I teach about how to combine fasting and exercise because we know 3 things for sure that suppress mTOR. The first thing is coffee. Coffee showed in multiple studies to lower mTOR, which is good. And then fasting will lower mTOR. Right after coffee, the next thing we know that lowers mTOR is fasting. And even a brief fast, 12, 14, 16 hours without eating, which sounds like a long time, but it isn't. I'll tell you why in a bit. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing is exercise. So when you're actually lifting something or sprinting, it pushes mTOR lower and lower. And if you triple down on all those things, and this is a technique I call tripling down on mTOR, and I wrote about it first in 2014, but I revisit it with more science in Fast This Way. And if you do that, and then you exercise at the end of a fast when you had coffee in the morning, and then you eat, you're now in a situation where as soon as you eat, your mTOR is going to spike way higher than it otherwise would have. And then what you end up with is protein available because you ate and very high mTOR to tell your body to put the protein into the muscles. And you can do that and you put muscle on faster. But if you go the other route, which is eat lots of protein all the time to get real swole, you can do it. It's just not probably going to result in feeling great. And I've met tons of fitness competitors, especially women, who say, I looked better than I've ever looked and I felt worse than I've ever felt. And mTOR drives inflammation as well. So I would say eat so your brain works really well. And then your goal would be to be almost muscular and relatively low, but not crazy low body fat. And if your expectation is like, I want to look like Wolverine all the time, just keep in mind, Wolverine fasted for a couple days and took diuretics to drop extra water out to get that lean, shredded look. And everyone who's ever been on the cover of Men's Health did the same thing. And I had an experience a couple of years ago. Men's Health came to my house to write about my Upgrade Labs company. And they said, oh, we're going to do some photos, which is great. But if you're going to do a shirts off Men's Health photo, there's a protocol you go through to do that. And they're like, all right, it wasn't on the menu, but why don't we do a shirts off photo? I'm like, over my dead body. Like, come on here. Like I saw stretch marks. I was a 300-pounder guy and I can walk around semi-naked at Burning Man and all, but that's kind of asking a lot. They said, look, let's just try it. And if you don't like it, whatever. So the least likely thing ever to happen to the fat computer hacker me in my 20s was that I'd be in Men's Health with my shirt off in a full page photo without fasting, without taking any diuretics or anything else like that. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I do have abs and yeah, you can see the stretch marks, but it's like, I'm a fit guy, right?
Right.
It's because of the food. It's because of the fasting. And I don't lift anywhere near as much as a bodybuilder and I don't look like a bodybuilder, but I look fit and strong and lean. And that's where you want to be.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think, there's different strokes for different folks in terms of their goals. I think some people probably prioritize, maybe younger guys looking bigger versus, quantity of life and longevity. But, there's certainly, I think, an emerging school of folks like Martin Burke-Hans who popularized lean gains that you can do intermittent fasting and, have pretty good muscular hypertrophy as well. So you mentioned kind of the fasting windows. Why don't you talk to our audience a little bit about, based on all of the research that you've done and the experts that you've talked to, what's a effective protocol for people in terms of how they should approach fasting?
Well, first, I want to make sure that we're respectful of Martin's work. And I mention him briefly in the book. Martin uses a 16-8 fast, but he has a whole lean gains eating program that goes along with it. Right. And it's just like the Bulletproof diet. It's like, yeah, there's intermittent fasting in there. But to say if I'm doing a 16-8 fast, which means I don't eat for 16 hours and I eat all of my calories in 8 hours, you're not doing lean gains unless you also go do his diet along with it, just to give credit where credit is due. When people come up with, eat this and then fast, it's not like you're doing the whole program if you're just fasting. Mm-hmm. And the approach that I take in Fast This Way is it's very flexible and it depends on where you are metabolically, how well you slept last night, whether you've lifted or you trained recently, whether you have jet lag, whether you're getting sick. And certainly the difference for men and women is very big. So there isn't a fixed window. What I can tell you is studies show that the minimum effective fast is 12 hours.
Right.
which is barely a fast. Here's how you fast 12 hours. Have dinner and be done by 6.
Yep.
Then 4 hours before bedtime, sleep for 8 hours, you did a 12-hour fast.
Right.
And if you're saying, oh, maybe I'll have breakfast 2 hours late, you just went 14 hours without eating. It's not that hard. And maybe you go until 10 a.m. And did you just do a 16-hour fast? Yeah, you did. And if you wait till lunch, you did 18 hours without eating. But your body really felt like you just skipped breakfast. And if you do the fasting hacks that are in there during that window where you're likely to be low energy, your energy won't dip. You don't get hungry. And then you're like, oh, it's lunchtime. I guess I could eat. Versus I'm going to die if I don't have a taco in 5 minutes, which is the way I rolled most of my life. So it isn't a fixed window. And for women, what I recommend, especially if they're just getting started, is go for maybe a 14-hour fast 3 days a week. And there's new studies out of Australia, because for women, the numbers are different and there isn't as much research available. But they found that if you were to go on a 14-hour fast, just Monday, Wednesday, Friday, over the course of the week, your ketone levels rise. And I think 16 was better in the study. But even if you're having carbs and protein and all that, you're not eating keto the whole time, but you get slow increases in ketones to the point that it's metabolically useful. And what I've learned from Bulletproof over time is having ketones present most of the time changes your brain, changes your biology. You can do it by radically restricting carbs a lot of the time and cycling in and out, or you can do it with MCT oil, which is, well, given my I like to get stuff done sort of thing, that teaches the body you ought to be able to metabolize fat at any time. And if it's usually present, then you can do it. And so I'm just going to tell you, don't fast every single day. Even if you can, you're probably going to be better off once a week having some breakfast with protein in it and some fat and not carbs. And maybe once a week have, the gluten-free waffles. It's totally fine. And do not make the mistake that I made when I exercised 6 days a week, no matter what, even if I slept 2 hours, even during finals, even if I was sick. Fasting is like exercise for your cells. So you exercise more on days when you're ready, and you exercise less on days when you're not. And that's why I am opposed to all of the, you have to do this number and, here's your rigid schedule. You're going to do OMAD, 1 meal a day, once a week. And you're going to do, this number of days. I'm teaching 30,000 people right now in a free program on fastthisway.com. I'm just teaching in the book. And I'm like, here, let's walk through the different types of fasts you can do. But even then on our private Facebook group, some people are like, I wasn't feeling great, so I didn't do that one. I did something else today. I'm like, yes, that's how you fast. And it's the same thing. Don't say, here's my exercise regimen. I'm going to do it no matter what. It will not work as well. So the idea is you learn, I woke up this morning just feeling wrecked. Today's not a fasting day. Today's a breakfast day. And that freedom makes it easier. However, if you look at BJ Fogg's work on habit formation, he's been a guest on my show, and I'm sure you're familiar with his work. Right. From Stanford. He, look, habits are great, right? And if you do a habit, you don't have to think about it. And so then the activation energy is lower. So what you think about is, okay, most mornings I'm going to do some kind of a fast, but it doesn't have to be the same kind every morning. And there's the 3 hacks that I identify in the book are, number 1, black coffee during a fast. And there's a whole crowd of fasters who get really angry at that and say, you have to have only water during a fast. But they're missing the point of a fast. The definition of fasting is going without. You can fast from alcohol. You can fast from sex. You can fast from dopamine. I mentioned you in the book as well. Right? Thanks. You can fast from bad people. You can fast from the news. So the idea is, if it's something that you feel like you need, you teach the body to go without something that it thinks it needs. We know mentally you can go 60 or 90 days without starving to death. Why is it that you feel like you're going to die if you don't have lunch? The feeling is real, but the reality is not. And what fasting does psychologically is very powerful, because it puts you more in the driver's seat, and it makes you examine, okay, why am I actually hungry right now? Is it because I'm actually hungry, or is it something else? And what you find very quickly when you're doing the Fast This Way kind of program is, sometimes I'm really, really hungry. I have cravings, and sometimes I don't. And the way most of us are raised, it's like, oh, that's just how it is sometimes. But it's always something you did. And what you find really quickly is, if I have this for dinner, the next morning fast is going to be rough. You can turn off the roughness using the fasting hacks. I mentioned one of them is black coffee. But there's a lot going on around eat stuff that doesn't make you crave and your life is better even if you're not fasting. So this is kind of part of what you do. And there's a whole roadmap that people can download for free as just part of sharing the knowledge. It's on fastthisway.com. And the roadmap tells you, here's the stuff most likely to give you cravings. Here's the stuff least likely to give you cravings. So if you're eating, you wake up in the morning, you have gnawing hunger, you're like, there's no way I can go. It's what you had for dinner. And if you're one of the water only fasters, the idea is, okay, you have to have water because that's what mice did in a study. And there's great merit to water only fasting. You want to do a 10-day water fast under medical supervision. It's helped people cure cancer. However, the other things that go with it are laying on a couch, massage, relaxation, journaling, meditation. It is a spiritual fast. It is a cleanse. What most of us are talking about, though, is a lifestyle thing that works with being a parent. It works with being an entrepreneur. It works with being focused and high energy. So trying to do a spiritual water only fast when you're focused on high energy, it's a bit masochistic. And that's why I call that hair shirt fasting. And hair shirts are something that were invented by a weird sect of monks centuries ago. They would weave shirts out of human hair that were the itchiest shirts ever made. And then they would wear those to make themselves itchy, to remind themselves that suffering is a virtue. Now, I don't think suffering is a virtue. And I think people will fast if they don't have to suffer. So the idea, I'm going to be a purist, I'm only going to have water this morning. Screw that noise. Here's what coffee does for you. The amount of caffeine in 2 small cups of coffee doubles ketone production. And when ketones go up, hunger goes down because a hormone called ghrelin drops and a hormone called CCK goes up. So CCK makes you full, ghrelin makes you hungry. So like, oh, that was awesome. Maybe black coffee is enough. If you have some weight to lose, you've never fasted, it's not going to be enough, not for a while. So then the second hack is one I'm well known for. I'm not trying to sell it, but it's Bulletproof coffee. And I talk about why it works in the book. And one of the things that we didn't understand when I had yak butter tea on the side of Mount Kailash years ago, I'm like, why do I feel so amazing when I had this? And what sparked my interest in ultimately coming up with Bulletproof? It's that the MCT oil we know, the C8 MCT that I've pioneered and recommended, it's called Brighton Octane, is the Bulletproof brand of it. And it quadruples ketone production. The cheapest and most abundant MCT oil that you can buy doesn't raise ketones any more than corn oil. It doesn't have the special power. So it's got to be the right MCT oil. But now you've doubled ketones from coffee and you've quadrupled them from MCT. And that will get most people up to a level of ketones in the blood of 0.5, which is enough to turn off and on those 2 hunger hormones. So the other thing that's happening that I think is why the Tibetans blend their yak butter tea. Even if they don't have blenders, they'll blend it by hand. And it drove me nuts. A sane engineer like me, well, sane-ish, would just take a stick of butter, take a bite, and drink a cup of coffee and be done with it.
Sure.
But it doesn't work. And I wrote a sizable check to the University of Washington about 3 years ago and said, can you guys look at water chemistry? And Gerald Pollack has written several books on basic water biochemistry. And what he's discovered is that when your body uses water inside a cell, it's not using the water that you drink. You drink water, your body puts it next to cell membranes, which are made of tiny droplets of fat, and then it heats up the water using 1200 nanometer light, also known as body heat. And after a little while, the water changes its viscosity, its thickness. And this isn't one of those, magic fairy water things. This is, you can see it on a microscope. You can measure how much of the water is changed. It's called exclusion zone water. And for your body to burn fat or to burn glucose, you must have exclusion zone water in the cell because that's what the Krebs cycle relies on. For you to fold a protein, you must have exclusion zone water. So this is just what you do when you drink water, you turn it into this. Well, when you blend your Bulletproof coffee, even if you only put a half a teaspoon of butter in there, those tiny droplets of butter fat make very large exclusion zones in the water. That means that all the water that's in that coffee can immediately be used for energy creation without having to be heated up first. So if you don't want to be cold during a fast, this is a good way to do it. Let's see, where did I first have yak butter tea? It was 10 degrees below zero at 18,000 feet elevation. Why do they do it there? I wonder. I think this is why. And the paper, I believe Gerald Pollack just published it. I think he just turned 80. And one of those guys who spent 30 years trying to figure out, why does water act so weird? So this is why I believe at the beginning of a fast, even if you have very small amounts of MCT and oil blended into coffee or tea, if that's your thing, your body can then say, oh, I can recruit my own fat burning, or I can burn whatever was in the MCT. I can burn it more quickly, which means you don't get the crash and you get the focus that normally takes about 2.5 days of fasting. When I'm in the cave, by the third day, I'm like, wow, my cravings are gone and I have so much energy. And by the fourth day, I walked 10 miles in the desert after not having eaten for 4 days just because I wanted to. Like, you're just bursting with energy. And this is why people do spiritual fasts in all spiritual traditions. And I read about that in one of the chapters in Fast This Way, where, okay, you can do the spiritual fast, but to get there is painful. Or you could use some stuff to get there that first day so you could focus on your work. Or you could focus on meditation if that's your thing. But either way, it works. And the final fast hack that's in Fast This Way is called prebiotic fiber. And again, this makes a lot of the hair shirt fasters very angry because saying, well, Dave, there were some calories in that and calories break a fast. I'm like, no, these calories did not raise insulin, which is a hallmark of fasting, and they did not raise mTOR, which is a hallmark of fasting. And I've interviewed several experts from various fields of mitochondrial biology who say, yeah, what you're proposing here doesn't break the fast because it allows autophagy, this process of cleaning up your cells, to stay going. So this is cool. It means that you can get the benefits of the fast without having to think about food all the time because you wanted to think about your company or your family or whatever you wanted to think about. Sure. And the final thing, though, that makes me even more mad is prebiotic fiber. This stuff is a form of carbohydrate that your body can't digest. So your insulin levels will not go up at all. And your body sees and says, I got nothing to do with this. And because it's soluble, it's still liquid. So it doesn't turn on the physical digestion mechanisms. And then it hits your lower down in your gut, and then it becomes a fermentable fiber so that the good gut bacteria become more prolific, and they turn it into something called butyric acid, which is a short chain fatty acid that is pro-ketogenic and anti-inflammatory and is good for your brain.
And naturally occurring in butter.
Exactly. That's a fair point. In fact, I found 3 or 4 studies that show eating butyric acid in the form of butter has anti-inflammatory effects. And other studies show that making it on board in your gut has further beneficial effects. Mm-hmm. So if you add prebiotic fiber to a Bulletproof coffee and you have that in the morning, your insulin and mTOR levels will be low like they should be, but there is no way you'll be hungry. Oh, and soluble fiber, most people don't get enough of it, and it's correlated with a reduction in all-cause mortality. It's an anti-aging substance anyway, and it comes from the sap of trees. And it's cool because it's free of all the toxins that a lot of plants have that cause inflammation or cause cravings, but it feeds, in studies, lots of good stuff. And the one that I make for Bulletproof is called Inner Fuel, which is a combination of 3 clinically studied forms of this. One comes from it's large arabinogalactin. The other one is acacia gum and hydrolyzed guar gum. But if you Google Inner Fuel from Bulletproof, you can get the ingredients list. If you don't want to buy the stuff I make, that's fine. But when you put that in there, your body's like, okay, now my good gut bacteria are going. And maybe you're fasting for longer periods of time to starve out your bad gut bacteria. Maybe you went carnivore with no fermentable fiber for a brief period to do the same thing. That's all good. You don't have to do any of these hacks. I'm just saying, for the average person who wants to stay focused, if you do that in the morning, you will not think about food, and lunch will come. And you go, oh, I guess I could eat, but maybe I'll just wait till dinner because it's easier. Right. And that is like mind blowing, because most of us are like I was when I was much heavier. You always have cravings and you think they're hunger. And a craving is, if I don't eat soon, I'm going to die. And hunger is, I guess I could eat, like I probably ought to eat in the next couple hours, but it's a subtle feeling and it's not a stress feeling. And I just didn't know such a feeling existed until I figured out this intermittent fasting thing.
Totally. And how much prebiotic fiber do you typically recommend that people have?
About 20 grams. Mm-hmm. And you need this anyway.
At a time or broken up?
I just do it all in the morning. When I'm doing that technique. Every day in total, I actually target 60 grams, which is pretty heavy. I think the recommended, I'm just looking at my anti-aging research in my head. I think the RDA, the recommended amount from the government, is somewhere around 30 grams, maybe 20 grams. But the people who live longest eat a lot more of it. So for me, whenever I cook something, I just pour some in there. It has almost no flavor. So you put it in any sauce, any salad dressing, anything you bake, pretty much it just disappears into food. So my whole family gets a lot of soluble fiber. I measure my gut bacteria doing this. I quadruple the number of species of gut bacteria by using this in my diet regularly. And one of the hallmarks of aging is you have a reduction in the number of species of gut bacteria and the total volume of gut bacteria. That is not an issue for me anymore. And like, wait, I got to do this during a fast and it turned off my hunger and it had anti-aging properties. Well, I think we can do better than just water.
For sure. Yeah. That's such a great lesson. Also it goes back to our, transhumanism kind of thesis. I actually learned about prebiotic fiber through the Hadza, which are one of the last remaining hunter-gatherers who have been probably eating their ancestral diet for the last 10,000 years. And the reason I came across them is because of these microbiome researchers would go around the world, sample gut microbiomes, and they, at least at the time, the research had the most diverse gut microbiome that they had ever sampled of anywhere in the world. And now it's unclear whether more is always better. I think we're trying to figure that out, but certainly their levels of metabolic health is tremendously healthy. Like hunter-gatherers have almost no diabetes. It's like 1%, which is literally a tenth of what it is in Western societies. And they're consuming 100 to 150 grams of baobab, which is an ancestral fruit that comes from the trees that they have around that literally live for thousands of years, which is of course half prebiotic fiber that you were alluding to. I think it's primarily pectin, if I'm not mistaken. But reading that research, I actually consume about 50, 60 grams of baobab as my prebiotic fiber source. And it's been, tremendously filling. That's one of the things that I found. Just to your point, it's kind of funny that people could accidentally converge on similar trends.
Oh yeah.
If you consume, an 8 to 12, ounces of water, with a bunch of prebiotic fiber, and you do that, 15 to 30 minutes before any meal, you will eat less because you're already basically, fills you up, and, the fiber, the soluble portion of it obviously absorbs water. And so this is a technique called water preloading, where some of my academic colleagues have actually done research showing that, if you're consuming 500 ml, 16 ounces of water before meals, and my thesis has been if you add it with prebiotic fiber, it's extra filling essentially. So it's very cool to hear your application of it in particular with fasting. One other question that I had though is for folks who are caffeine sensitive, right? So they're not kind of big tea or coffee consumers. Can they still consume Bulletproof coffee and or prebiotic fiber and still get some of the benefits from the hacks?
About 5 to 10% of people have varying levels of sensitivity to caffeine because they can't metabolize it via genetic changes in just how their liver does stuff.
Yep, I am one of them.
You're one of them. So you're one of the bad people.
I did my 23andMe test, and they were like, "You're a slow metabolizer." I was like, "Yep, I've already known that."
A lot of people find that even if they're slow, but not the very slowest metabolizers, if they do 1 cup of Bulletproof in the morning, they like it because one of the things that blending fat into your coffee does is it changes the pharmacokinetics of caffeine. And I always like to sound fancy of trimethylxanthine, which is the fancy words for caffeine. Right. But when you do that, it lowers the load, so it comes in more slowly. So you don't get the spike and crash that's common with coffee. And a lot of people think they're caffeine sensitive, are allergic to mold in coffee, and they drink clean coffee and like, oh wow, I can handle that. I quit coffee for 5 years until I figured that out. Like not all coffee has the same effect on your energy. And what you can do is you can switch to a lower caffeine tea and it works just fine. And there are great studies around the anti-aging and lowering of all-cause mortality effects of coffee. It works with decaf. Coffee is the number one source of polyphenols, and polyphenols themselves are prebiotics for the species of gut bacteria or the phylum of gut bacteria that are more common in thin people. So what that means is you want some colored compound in there because when you do it, it's going to work better, but it doesn't have to be caffeinated, and you might just need a much smaller amount of caffeine.
Yeah, that's a great point. We know from the nutrition science that fat and fiber lower the sort of the glycemic impact, or at least spread it out over time. So that's a great point in terms of a lot of people get a lot of the peripheral stimulation or jitteriness from caffeine because they just down a huge bolus of it. And if you don't sort of have tolerance to caffeine, it can make you a little anxious if you're kind of wired that way. So it might be something for people to sort of experiment with.
Yeah.
By the way, I love what you said about, when I was asking about the right fasting window, that you're a proponent of flexibility. which as a behaviorist, I'm a huge fan of. I always say, look, there are differences between diets. We know there's comparative studies on low carb versus low fat, but it pales in comparison to adherence. Adherence by far is the biggest predictor of any sort of health outcome. So I always say, look, the best diet is the one that you can stick to long term, because that's what works. And there's no point of you doing a crash diet and then quitting out of frustration, which I see all the time with all kinds of diets, right? People are like, yeah, I did keto for 6 months. I lost a bunch of weight and then I quit and I gained it all back. And I'm like, well, that's obviously not a long-term, health hack or benefit. So
I truly believe that few people can go keto and stay keto. And I don't even think it's good for you. I'm a huge fan of keto for decades, but not all the time. And the idea that it worked for a while, so I'm going to do more of it. It's the same thing that happens with a vegan diet. You go vegan for a month, you'll probably feel better than what you're eating before, but you do it for 6 months and it's going to wreck your hormones and it's not going to make you feel good. And you go keto, you'll do great. You'll lose half the weight and then the other half will stick around forever because you're inflamed. So flexibility has to be there. But I know people who have been Bulletproof for 10 years. It is sustainable because it's a roadmap. And the thing about a roadmap is you're always in a neighborhood. You're never off the Bulletproof diet. Like, okay, I spent today in a sketchy neighborhood, but I'm not off the diet. And tomorrow I'm going to be in a better neighborhood. And if you say, oh man, I was going to fast 18 hours, but I only fasted 17 hours, therefore I'm a failure, therefore I'm not going to fast, it doesn't work. And the idea is, you know what, I planned 18, but it turned out 17 was better for me today. Okay, do it again tomorrow. It's all right. And maybe 17 is always going to be better for you. You just don't know. But militant rules around fasting generally are only going to lead to problems. You either underfast or overfast, or maybe you'll get an eating disorder. None of those are necessary.
Of course. Yeah, that's a great
and
point.
especially for women, when you're menstruating is probably not a good time for fasting. And to say I'm going to follow the same fasting rules all the time throughout the month, there isn't good science to support that.
Absolutely. Conversely, given our audience is primarily male, are there special things that guys should be aware of or adjust in terms of their fasting that makes it easier for them or better for them?
Guys are way more tolerant to fasting than women on average, and it has to do with evolutionary biology, just around risks to the system. We're not likely to get pregnant in the midst of a famine, so our body doesn't have as much anxiety if we send it a famine signal. What happens when guys over fast or over keto, they're actually very similar. But if you're fasting for too long of a period for too much time, the first thing you're going to find is your Oura ring score drops. Your morning readiness, your sleep score goes down. The second thing you're going to find is that you don't really have the same kickstand in the morning that you're used to having. And the third thing you're going to find is that you're getting thin hair as your cortisol levels go up. So it's this idea. I felt so good when I did a 16-hour fast. So I went to 18. Then I went to OMAD. Then I went to OMAD every day. Then I went to OMAD every day. Plus I do a 2-day fast on Friday and Saturday. And then once a quarter, I do an 8-day fast. And eventually the body's like, can I have some goddamn food already? Like you've activated all of my autophagy that was necessary, but now I'm running a calorie deficit. And I would like listeners to just remember, calories are a measure of energy. And when someone tells you eat a low calorie food, did you want to be low energy? No. Eat calories your body can use effectively to make energy without creating inflammation, and eat enough of those so that you have all the energy you want, but not more than you need. And if you do that, it's going to feel a lot better than this ridiculous calories in, calories out broken model where all foods have 3 things in them. They have some amount of energy. They have some amount of nutrients, and that's where most nutritional science stops. Oh, that food had fiber, therefore it's good for you. But they miss the third thing that all food has, which is anti-nutrients, right? And these are things that stop the food from being good for you. So it's not like a food is just either good or bad. It has some good aspects, has some energy aspects, and some bad aspects. And whether it's bad for you versus bad for me is sometimes gut bacteria and sometimes genetics. And sometimes it's just never that good for anyone, but we can eat it to survive when we need to. It's just not a great ongoing food source. And the plants make themselves not ongoing food sources because they don't want us to eat them. So the way of the calories in, calories out people, they would say, oh, you want to eat food that has no energy in it and has lots of nutrients, and they would ignore anti-nutrients. So you take a bowl of cyanide, pour a vitamin on it, and they go, great, it's got almost no calories and it's full of vitamins. You should eat that. And they're completely just missing that other thing that's in there. And no, most plants don't have cyanide, although wild cassava root does have cyanide, which is why it kills animals and pigs who eat it. although cassava root can be good for you if it's cultivated and cooked right. So, most of the time the toxins aren't that big, but they do drive inflammation. They can suppress testosterone, and they can do all sorts of other things to just make you not feel good. And then you don't know why you have all these problems. So I think this is something that you pay extra attention to when you fast, because when you eat foods that contain anti-nutrients, you will have cravings the next day. So if your fast was rough, go back to the last meal, look through the Bulletproof Diet Roadmap. There's a list of suspect foods in the middle. Like, which of those suspect foods did I eat? Because I'm pretty sure one of those was guilty, maybe two of them. And then when you get this in, you're like, wait a minute, this food that I've been eating forever, it's not really compatible with my biology. I shouldn't be eating that, because when I do, it makes me profoundly hungry, which is a sign that it took something away from you instead of put something into you.
Yeah, it's such a great point. I want to emphasize this to our audience, particularly those who may have not kind of deep dived into sort of animal and plant-based, sort of diets. Animals have a natural defense mechanism in terms of they can just run away, right? So they have much less of these anti-nutrients. But plants, given that they're sedentary, often do have more of these anti-nutrients. And so it doesn't mean that eating all plants is unhealthy, but depending on, to your point, the type of plant and how it's prepared, I think we've become increasingly aware, in the science that, more plants aren't always better, right? And so
how dare you say that?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I think people just associate vegetables with healthy diets, right? Like the stereotype is if you're a salad eater, it's optimal. While we know, obviously, you can eat too much, right? If you have too much kale, you can have too many oxalates. People actually get kidney stones from excessive kale and spinach smoothies, which are these anti-nutrients that you're talking about. In fact, the Hadza that I mentioned, it was really interesting when I was studying their diet. They're not eating a lot of green leafy vegetables,
Nope.
Which everyone says. They're eating the baobab that I mentioned. They do have some tubers. So, these kind of, root vegetables or, they'll have berries, which are nowhere near as giant or sweet as the ones that we have. But other than that, they're basically eating meat and honey. And so it kind of questions, like, do we need to be scarfing ourselves with tons of green leafy vegetables? Don't get me wrong. I think it's probably better than eating ultra processed food and eating a Pop-Tart for sure. But too much of anything can be a bad thing, particularly when you're talking about these anti-nutrients that you've introduced.
It's when I came out with the Bulletproof Diet, the main book was in 2014, but the info had been online since 2011. And I'm like, look, there's these 5 classes of foods that are causing problems in masses of people they don't know about. So I talked about lectins. And since then, lectin awareness has gone up a lot. I talked about oxalic acid. And since then, we're finally talking about it. In fact, I went on the Joe Rogan show like 5 years ago. I'm like, Joe, here's the problem with kale smoothies. And here's how you might want to prepare your kale to get rid of oxalic acid. And then there was a little bit of an economically driven falling out, we'll say. And then about 5-6 years later, he was like, guys, I had to quit drinking kale smoothies because of the oxalic acid. I'm like, man, I told you on your show. But it takes a while for these things to become into awareness. I will tell you straight up, if you have a giant raw kale salad for dinner, the next morning, it's going to suck to fast. But if you had iceberg or some kind of colored lettuce in your salad, your fast is going to be better. And it's because of oxalic acid. It's just how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of, fasting for men's health, I'm particularly curious if, and by the way, I'm glad that you said that fasting is not primarily for weight loss. It can be used for weight loss, but to your point, it's really primarily used for energy. A lot of the people in our community are really interested in hormone, particularly testosterone optimization, right? How can I, whether through lifestyle or pharmacologically, optimize my testosterone? So if that's my true north or my marker, what would you suggest nutritionally and also in terms of how you set up a fast that can make sure that you're maintaining optimal testosterone levels?
When you eat, do lots of saturated fat, grass-fed butter, and either lightly cooked or uncooked egg yolks are your best sources. Grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb with the fat still on. This is well known by bodybuilders to work. One of the hacks when you are going to have protein in the morning, which you might want to do if it was yesterday was a heavy lift, today I'm not fasting, but you can put 3 or 4 egg yolks into a Bulletproof coffee just as it's blending and they disappear. If you think about what's in ice cream, it's cream, egg yolks, and sugar. But you don't need the sugar. So you're basically getting butter, same fat as in cream, and egg yolks. It doesn't taste eggy at all. It just tastes creamy. And getting more of those if you're not sensitive to eggs, and many people are sensitive to eggs. So if you
Right.
want
In
to
terms of
test
histamine,
yourself,
right?
yeah, well, eggs aren't generally high histamine, but they're just an allergen for a lot of people. If it's an older egg or something, you might get histamine with it. And histamine is one of the things that drives cravings pretty dramatically. And I talk about, here's why leftover pork or leftover fish or leftover fermented soy is really likely to just make you want sugar like no one's business. It's a histamine thing, which is a neurotransmitter, as you well know, as well as something that drives mast cells and drives inflammation. So you just start learning, oh, here are the most likely things that cause cravings. But for testosterone, if you get, what I've been recommending for a long time is you want at least half your diet to be fat and at least half your fat to be saturated, and you minimize omega-6 seed oils. And this is like Bulletproof Diet 101 stuff. And it's also what I'm recommending in Fast This Way. And you do that because omega-6 oils are inflammatory. And when you have more inflammation, you have less testosterone. Mm-hmm. But there's other things you want to do. One of the important things is go to sleep.
Yeah.
You actually have to sleep. I'll be the first guy to say, I don't actually like sleep. I have fought against sleep for many years, and I sucked at it as a result. Mm-hmm. When I started Bulletproof, I was intentionally cut my sleep to 4 hours a night. Mm-hmm. I increased my calories to about 4,500 calories a day. Wow. And I stopped exercising. So I'm going to do this. Yeah. And I'm going to gain 3 pounds this month. And that's setting yourself up to be fat, to be honest. But I was doing it with intermittent fasting. I was doing it with Bulletproof coffee, all this kind of stuff. And I was just going to show calories in, calories out. By this definition, I should have gained 20 pounds. I didn't. Therefore, our equations are broken. What I did is I lost weight, even on that stupid regimen, and felt really good, to be honest. It's not I don't recommend anyone do that. It's not good for you to overfeed, and it's not good for you to cut your sleep that much. But when you start measuring your sleep, I recommend the Oura Ring. I'm an investor and advisor to the company, but I was CTO of another company that made a product in the generation before that, so I know the space really well. Right. And when you do that, if you can get an hour and a half or 2 hours of deep sleep, and ideal an hour and a half to 2 hours of REM sleep, people who clean up their diet, don't eat these inflammatory things, don't eat the bad oils, they generally need less sleep. And I've been hearing for a long time people saying, I went Bulletproof and I need less sleep. Is that normal? Like, yeah. People with less toxins and people with more energy require less time to be asleep. The people who live the longest sleep 6.5 hours a night, not 8 hours a night. People die more of all-cause mortality who need 8 hours a night versus need less. Just means healthy people need less sleep. I'm not saying you should cut your sleep. Get good, deep sleep. And the way you do that is stop eating after 6. Yeah. That makes a huge difference. Don't eat when it's dark outside. And then you will sleep better. And this has to do with circadian biology and timing of light and food. And there's actually a chapter in Fast This Way on how to reset your circadian rhythm using a combination of light and food, because light is a stronger signal of what time of day it is than food availability. But food availability is a pretty strong signal. So you can combine light and food at different times of day to become a morning person or to become a night person. Which is really interesting. And if you eat later at night, you shift your sleeping window later and later, and you lower your quality of sleep. So the difference between eating at 7 and eating at 6 is very profound. And a better sleep equals better testosterone.
Yeah, that's such a huge point. Yeah, and I think the unfortunate thing is like a lot of the research that we have on sleep is associational or correlational. There's a lot of research that shows people who sleep too much have worse mortality outcomes. Unfortunately, it's all confounded by the fact that those are people who are often clinically depressed, who have hypersomnia as well. So I don't actually think I personally don't think we know what the optimal amount of sleep is. 7 to 9, I think, is probably good depending on your level of physical activity. But what I'm hoping with technology, whether it's Oura or other sleep trackers, is instead of looking so much at the quantity of sleep, we have these more nuanced measures of REM. You mentioned an hour and a half of REM, hour and a half of deep sleep, and those may end up being better predictors of quality of life and mortality outcomes than just, how much time are you spending in bed? So I think that's a great point. I also wanted to reiterate your point about nutrition, right? 50% fat, 25% of the total, or half of that being saturated fat is a really important tip in avoiding omega-6 seed oils. What do you recommend in terms of replacing those seed oils with?
Grass-fed butter, animal fats. You can have some monounsaturated fats, but avocados, they're pretty darn good. They have some omega-6 in them, but your body does need some omega-6. Even grass-fed beef fat is about 2% omega-6. But the trick is you want it to be undamaged, and all the chemically separated seed oils are completely broken fats. So you can probably have a little bit more omega-6 if you're having avocados, which contain some of it, but they're still primarily the monounsaturated fats. So your diet should be mostly saturated and monounsaturated and small amounts of that. So you can have avocados. Most nuts aren't that great. Macadamias and cashews tend to have the best fatty acid ratio, which, funny enough, I wonder why there's cashews in the Bulletproof collagen bars versus another nut that, I did that on purpose because I wanted the fatty acid ratio where it would be appropriate in those bars. And what you end up with when you do this, you're saying, oh, what do I add? You can have MCT oil, you can have coconut oil, you can have chocolate fat, basically butter fat or cacao butter, which is also really good. And those are the primary fats. Then you can say olive oil, a tablespoon or two per day of really high-end olive oil is probably good for you. But if you're saying, oh, olive oil is healthy, I'm going to have 2 cups of it a day, you're getting too much omega-6 even from that. And if you cook it, then you're just doing it wrong altogether.
Absolutely. So yeah, great overview of nutrition for testosterone, sleep for testosterone. How do we use fasting to maintain good testosterone levels? And how do you, to your point, make sure you're not over fasting that causes a suppression inadvertently?
The way to use fasting for this is use that triple down on mTOR technique I talked about earlier. What you want to be able to do is fast. At the end of the fast, do something quick and heavy, and it can be for 10 minutes. Do a bunch of air squats, do some pull-ups, do some push-ups, or maybe you want to do resistance bands or go to the gym or run electricity over your muscles the way I do. All of those will work, but get heavy duty stimulation and then eat some protein and eat some fat and eat a moderate amount of carbs. It turns out if you're keto all the time, that can also be suppressive of testosterone. So having moderate carbohydrates helps with testosterone formation. And going back to that Hudza thing, all right, so you had some starch, ideally resistant starch, hard to digest starch that doesn't spike insulin, but that's going to help a lot. It's also well established, and I cite some of the studies in the book, eating sugar and spiking your blood sugar will lower testosterone actually very dramatically. So keeping your sugar low, but having some carbs, those are different things, is a useful thing, especially after a workout. So sizable protein, I prefer collagen as the dominant protein because it's less inflammatory. And then have some grass-fed whatever. The other thing that I think we have to talk about nutritionally, if you are eating industrial meat still, you got to stop. And it's cheap and easy to eat industrially raised animals, but here's what they do. They take a concentrated mold toxin called zearalenone. Zearalenone is 1,000 times more estrogenic than human estrogen. And it's a defense compound made by a mold. It's kind of like an antibiotic, but it's not an antibiotic. And they make it into a waxy pellet and they sell it called Zeranol. And you put it in the cow's ear. And then it dissolves into the tympanic membrane, into the tissues in the ear where there's lots of blood flow. And it enters the cow's body. And get this, why do they do that? Because the cow gets fat on 30% less calories. It increases feed efficiency. By the way, since that is possible, we have disproven calories in, calories out 100%. If the cow can get fat on 1/3 less calories with a drug, it's not about the calories, period. Okay. But the problem is you eat that cow. Do you want to eat the stuff that made the cow marbled? I don't, because it's going to make you marbled. So there's all sorts of environmental reasons to eat grass-fed meat where we need animal poop to build healthy soil. But if you're eating the industrial meat, it will suppress testosterone. It contains more estrogen. It has antibiotics in it that affect your gut bacteria negatively, which also can suppress testosterone. And something else that's really important that almost no one talks about is that mitochondria, these power plants in your cells, they're not really power plants. They're environmental sensors and factories. So they're ancient bacteria who think they're in charge of you. So they try to get a sense of your stress and time of day and all sorts of stuff, nutrient availability. And then they say, I'm going to make X amount of energy, which is what we like to think about them as the power plants. I'm also going to make X amount of neurotransmitters, and I'm going to make X amount of hormones. So your mitochondria can directly manufacture testosterone. So if you were to do intermittent fasting, which increases mitochondrial performance and it lowers insulin resistance, so your mitochondria are better at taking in sugar so that they can actually do their job, they can make more testosterone as well. So the better energy you have in your cells, the more your cells can make testosterone, whether it's cells in the gonads or cells throughout the body. They all can do it. You can make testosterone on board in the brain if you need to.
Yeah, that's a great point. Are there other techniques that you find particularly helpful as well in terms of optimal hormone production?
Really, that high intensity interval training,
Mm-hmm.
sprinting for 30 seconds. And then this will sound weird. If you sprint for 30 seconds, like a tiger's going to eat you, and then lay on your back for a minute or 90 seconds instead of standing up, and then get up and then do it again, get up and do it again. And I write about this in Fast This Way. There's something called slope of the curve. And I believe this is going to be proven out over time in systems biology,
Okay.
where all of the things that cause the biggest improvements in performance, it's not about total area under the curve, which is,
Mm-hmm.
volume of work done. It's how quickly
Right.
did you have to turn it on and then turn it off.
Right.
And so with high intensity interval training, I had to turn it on like there's a tiger, but then when you lay down on your back and you can more quickly reach equilibrium, up,
Mm-hmm.
down, that's what causes the improvement, not up, hold it up, hold it up, hold it up, hold it up, hold
Right.
it up. That's just pain and stress. So
Right.
these quick bursts, same thing, 3-minute cold shower in the morning, that's shown to raise testosterone.
Mm-hmm.
The first 3 days suck. After 3 days, the body changes the level of cardiolipin in the mitochondrial membrane. You make more energy and suddenly it feels good. You get endorphins, your testosterone goes up. Another thing that I know raises testosterone, because there's studies about it, one of my companies called TrueDark actually makes LED therapeutic devices. You can use red and infrared light over the testes, and red and
Mm-hmm.
infrared light is shown to raise testosterone. So you go to bed at night, you put a red light over your junk for a while, and you wake up in the morning, there will be changes in nitric oxide for sure, because you'll definitely have a pretty hefty kickstand, but it also is increasing the mitochondrial function of the gonads themselves. And so there
Yeah.
are studies showing that you can use light, even sunlight. Not that you won't get arrested for that.
Yeah, I was gonna say I'd love to read the studies on those because yeah, I've seen a lot of various claims made, and I certainly see a lot of people about making claims about sunning their balls on sort of social media bro sites. I actually had a client, by the way, who tried it, tested their testosterone levels before and after, showed no difference actually. My theory around it is, at least in terms of the sunlight, is that may be true for folks who are not getting sunlight, period. Obviously, if they go out in the sun, they're going to improve their vitamin D levels, improve their testosterone levels. I think if you're already getting sufficient sunlight, I'm not sure the additional
Look,
sunning is helpful.
sunning your balls is good for social media jokes. And I did one a while ago and I hashtagged it butthole sunning. And it was like, well, there are some studies, but it was completely a joke. And it was very obviously a joke. And I'm just sitting on a beach in a pose where fortunately you don't have to stare directly into the sun or see anything you can't unsee. But I actually was in some like Page 6 or some kind of tabloid over it. And I was just laughing because no one,
Seriously, yeah.
I mean, no one is going to do this on a regular basis. It's absurd and it's not necessary. I do say though, if you have direct red and infrared, we know what red light does in terms of increasing nitric oxide. We know what it does in terms of adding electrons into the electron chain transport. And that it tends to speed healing. And there's lots of good science about photobiology and low level light therapy stuff. And honestly, most guys will notice a difference. If you do 20 minutes at night, you'll notice a difference in your erection the next morning. Like, oh, that's interesting. And I think that's probably more of a nitric oxide than testosterone effect.
Yeah.
But generally, I've been using light therapy for 20 years, whether it's abdominally. There's a new set of research that comes out that say it's red light, infrared light changes gut bacteria beneficially, putting it over the abdomen. So like all kinds of crazy stuff we're learning about just narrow spectrums of light. And if you look at what we've just talked about with food, like, oh, this fat, but not that fat, and this protein, but not that protein, this time of day, but not that time of day. Light is a series of nutrients. So which spectrum at what time of day, at what intensity, where on the body, there's a lot that's coming out about this. There's stuff about amber light that I've included in the stuff that I make. Different frequencies of red do different things. Some blue is good, some blue is bad. Too much. It's very complex, but I would say for testosterone synthesis, having better mitochondria around your testes is probably a good idea.
Absolutely. Do you try to actually get natural sunlight as well, or optimize your vitamin D levels towards that end?
It's been the top supplement of all supplements I recommend since I started blogging is vitamin D. I believe you always want to take it with vitamin K2 to avoid calcification of tissues. I believe you should always get a blood test. And if you have higher levels of vitamin D, you're more likely to have higher levels of testosterone. They're probably intermingled. I believe that the optimal numbers would be between 70 and 90 on a blood test for vitamin D. And different people require radically different amounts of supplements to get there because of the vitamin D receptor gene. For me, I need 15,000 IUs of vitamin D a day, which is at the very high end for a pale guy like me, but that's my genes. And if I didn't know that, I'd be taking 5,000 a day like normal people, and my levels would be 35, which is what I get from taking 5,000. So that's worth testing. And I have tested when I go out in the sun, I'm brown, fully tanned, going to Hawaii for a month, even in Canada in summer where it's light till I cannot get my vitamin D out from sunlight. Very few people can. So I've had enough of my executive staff meetings where, I'm laying on the deck. I'm like, I'm not going to move the camera because I'm getting as much sun as I can get here. But for most people, it's not even feasible to rely only on sunlight. But my recommendation to raise testosterone in the morning, as naked as you can get without sunglasses or contact lenses, get 20 minutes of sunlight. And this is around setting circadian biology. So you'll sleep better at that night, which is going to improve testosterone. So I take my shirt off whenever I can, walk around in shorts. You need that to sulfate your vitamin D. Even if you're taking a supplement, you still need sunlight, but relying on sunlight alone is a fool's errand for the vast majority of people.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And in fact, there's emerging research that's showing that there's benefits of sunlight beyond vitamin D in terms of especially the blood pressure lowering effects seems to be uniquely.
It's a nitric oxide effect from sunlight.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously people need to balance that with, associated cancer risk if they're super pale. Obviously the general rule of thumb, never burn is a useful rule of thumb for people, which interestingly decreases also with reducing some of the seed oils and omega-6 that you mentioned, one of the inadvertent side effects.
In fact, if you eat a lot of omega-6s, you're likely to get terrible sunburns. When you suppress omega-6s and take a lot of astaxanthin, which is one of the things I use in the supplements I formulate, your resistance to sunburn goes way up. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. However, sunlight still ages your skin when you get too much of it. So there's a group of, skin doctor type of people say, always wear sunscreen, never go out without it. I don't think that's a good idea. But if you're going to say, I'm going to spend an hour a day out in bright sunlight with my shirt off, do that for a couple of years and you're going to look old. Like it ages you. So it's like 20 minutes. That's about what you need. And after that, you probably want to use a hat and a shirt or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I always tell people, look, if you are cosmetically oriented, which I think most of us are, definitely put it on your face and neck at least, so that, which is the most visible signs of aging. You can tan your body. So that may be a kind of a balancing act. But I love what you said about testing your vitamin D levels too. I found that myself. I was like, I live right here. You can see the beach in the background. Was getting enough, sunlight, and unfortunately in a place where there's a lot of vitamin D exposure. But yeah, on 5,000 IUs a day, my levels were still, low. And so I like you, I'm on 15,000 because I use a vitamin D with K2. Because I found in order to get to that 70 to 90, or some of the studies I've seen, like 80 to 100 is optimal for testosterone. You got to supplement, you know what I mean? So
I would be very happy with 80 to 100. The reason I say 70 to 90 is that I know if you go above 100, I've been up to 120, it actually is pro-inflammatory at a certain point. You're more likely to get migraines and all. And so I find people have a hard time dialing it in, but there's a clear case to go up to 100, but I maybe have a little bit of a caution bumper in there, but I'd have no issue with someone at 95 or 100. That's perfectly good.
Totally. And that's why people will test. And that's actually one of the really interesting things that we're working on at Maximus is to be able to, offer that as a service to people, so they can test their vitamin D levels and then, optimize and dial them in, so that they can at least have the foundational substrates for optimal hormone functioning, which I think is absolutely critical. Excellent. One of the things, from your book I wanted to touch on is the 4 F words that affect everything that you do. So tell me more about that.
Well, we mentioned these mitochondria. They are ancient bacteria. If you were to, say, turn on a video game where you get to be God and you're going to make a new life form. Now, this is a life form that doesn't have a brain. It can only run repetitive actions. How would you make a life form that was going to live forever and succeed? Well, there's a set of things all life on Earth does that emerge from that requirement because life starts out as single-celled organisms. The first thing that you have to do is run away from, kill, or hide from scary things. Right? And different animals will, or life forms, even trees, they'll turn this on in different ways. Sometimes it's a hiding strategy. Sometimes it's a runaway. Sometimes it's kill. You have venom, you have teeth, you think yourself. So this is a primary thing, but it gets 10 times more focused, this first F word. So in our lives, when we find things that our ancient defense networks believe are threats, even if they're not actually threats, we will allocate our energy towards that first and with intensity. And then you'll stop making testosterone if you're stressed all the time because you're afraid of things that aren't actually really going to kill you. And this is an automated system that happens before you get to think about it. It's the same system if you lean against a hot stove and you pull your hand away and go, good thing I pulled my hand away. Like, you didn't pull your hand away. Something else pulled your hand away. You just took credit for it. Well, it's that same system that's running fear. The second F word that drives all life forms is food, because famine has killed everything. So you would set these rules up to say, basically, if it might be scary, go into protection mode. If it is food, eat it. All of it. These are basic rules, and it's a bacteria. It's not going to say, oh, eat only the good stuff. It's like, no, if you could eat it, do it. So then you want life to be around forever. It's also an F word. So we have fear, we have food. The other F word all life has to do?
Fornicate.
I was thinking about fertility, but you can just go right for the nasty. At least you didn't go for the 4-letter version. Yeah, the one that requires testosterone, right? Reproduction. So if fear is a 10x, food is a 5x, and sex is a 3x, right? And this is why, if you don't have love in your life as an adult, there's this vague sense of anxiety around you, like, I'm going to die. Well, this is your mitochondria saying the species is going to die if you don't get some, because you have to get some or we're all dead, because they don't know that you're not the last human on Earth. Like, they're dumb. They're bacteria. They have no context, no awareness. They can't see the future. They can't think about it. They don't know there's a taco truck outside. They don't know anything, right? But they get to act and think and sense first. And then they roll this up throughout this incredibly complex distributed network of decision-making things in the body. Eventually, it comes up into your brain. Then you have a prefrontal cortex with 7 layers that strips off all this stuff, and you get the final thing at the top of that after all the filters. And this is why everyone listening to, everything you've ever done you're ashamed of came from your mitochondria, following the algorithm of life. And if you can turn down the amount of fear, it frees up energy. If you can turn down hunger, which is actually easy to do with what we talked about today, it increases energy. In fact, 15% of the average person's thoughts every day are about food. And that's a study that I cite in the book. You want 15% of your thoughts back? It's not 15% of thoughts, it's 15% of energy that went into thoughts back. And the energy can go into burning fat, can go into folding proteins, it can go into all kinds of stuff, right? And then the fourth F word is friend. And all life does that. That's why we take care of our elders. That's why we take care of our young. That's why we're actually wired to be kind to each other. At a core level, in our bones, we're wired to be kind to each other. We just won't do it if we're afraid, and we won't do it if we're hungry, and we won't do it if we're not getting some. And even worse, if you don't have a desire to get some, that's a sign that you're ready to die from the mitochondria's perspective, because to them, you're just a petri dish, and they're walking you around all day long, making sure that you reproduce their petri dishes for them. And when you look at the definition of biohacking that we talked about in the first episode, change the environment around you and inside of you so you have full control of your own biology. Those little bastards, those mitochondria, they listen to the environment around you, but they don't really hear the voices in your head unless they're fear voices. So, like, I'm going to change my temperature. I'm going to change my food availability. I'm going to change my light. And they'll say, oh, great, I'll make more testosterone. Great, I'll make more energy. Oh, I'll make more of what you want. But if you don't recognize that they're listening to the environment around you, then you don't change the environment around you. And then you wonder why you suck at turning air and food into energy. And then you feel like crap all the time. That's why. And I use that to explain why people don't try fasting, and why starvation fears equals real fears equals why would I even pay attention to fasting? So the psychology of fasting and making it actually doable is a core part of Fast This Way. That's why it was worth writing a book about fasting, because I didn't want to write that Don't Eat for a While, It's Good for You book, because we all know, but no one's going to do it unless you understand this is going on. And it's also relaxing, because it means all those times you were a total jerk, it was probably your mitochondria's fault.
There you go. Someone to blame. It's such a rich evolutionary, kind of theory though, and it's useful to think about. I like to joke sometimes that a failed hunt was the original intermittent fast, basically.
Amen.
So you're like, we obviously evolved to deal with. There's going to be feast or famine sometimes, and we probably just on the basis of luck or failure did not eat all the time, and so we're pretty resilient creatures, and I think sometimes we forget that. And we're also folks that, if there were a bunch of berries, around in the summer, we probably gorged ourselves on them to purposely fatten up because we didn't know if we're going to eat enough in the winter. But obviously, we're not in a food, starved environment these days. So a lot of those evolutionary, traits that we picked up are not as adaptive and maybe in fact maladaptive in our modern environment.
Well said.
And what I particularly love about your 4 F's too is, everyone talks about diet, exercise, and sleep in terms of kind of foundational health behaviors. But I'm really glad that you talk about, I call the 4th foundational health behavior intimacy, right? So this is the friends and the fertility that you're kind of mentioning, that I think people underappreciate and underemphasize in terms of not only their psychological health, but their physiological health as well. If we don't have quality, deep, intimate relationships, whether that's friendships or obviously a romantic partner, like for instance, we were talking about the effects of the sun, but people also underappreciate the effects of touch. Physical touch is something that, is very, very important in terms of our healing, whether that's, in an intimate context. Even massage is therapeutic. There's studies that show it can be actually very complementary to psychotherapy in terms of treating depression. And so I think people also should really kind of pay attention to those things. And then the 5th foundational health behavior that I think also people underappreciate is focus, right? And so you talked a little bit about dopamine fasting in the book, which is obviously near and dear to my heart.
And I credit you for it in the book, just so.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So can you tell me why you decided to mention that in the book and why you think dopamine fasting is important?
Fasting is going without, and it's going without things that you think you need, right? Or it's more things that you feel that you need, even though you think you don't need them. And so we have this fight between the feelings that are emerging from these mitochondria, and they're saying, I got to look at my phone because if there's a threat, the phone will tell me a threat and it's interesting and I get dopamine, woo, woo, woo. And you get sort of into it. And when you say, I'm going to fast from food or from certain food anyway, it increases insulin sensitivity. That was the body's like, oh, now that I have food available, I'll do a better job of using it because I might not have some for a while. Same exact thought that you had when you came up with the idea of dopamine sensitive or dopamine fasting to increase dopamine sensitivity, where it's okay, if I feel like I have to have this constant stimulation from my phone or from spicy foods or exciting stuff all the time, we're in a world where you can dial up excitement. You got online porn, you got online gambling. You don't have to leave your house. You can have online shopping, and all of these are dopaminergic experiences. So the idea that, I'm just going to go for a while without them. What else was I doing when I fasted in a cave for 4 days with no people and no social media, no phone, no nothing? It was exactly that. It was a dopamine fast. And it's called calmness. It's called peace. And having that on occasion means that when you do something that's fun, it's more fun. And I liken it to when my 10-year-old son said, Daddy, I want to try fasting. I'm like, no, fasting isn't for kids, but you can try it a couple times. You try it once if you want to just see what it's like.
Sure.
And he said, okay, I'm going to do a 24-hour fast because I've seen you do that. I'm like, why don't you use some fasting hacks? It'll be easier. He goes, no, I want to see if I can do it. I'm just going to have water. I'm like, wow. Okay. No encouragement and, no eating disorder kind of stuff going on there. It was just like, I'm curious. So he did it, and he was a little tired that afternoon, the next day. But then when he had dinner, he ate it. He goes, oh, wow, Daddy, you're right. Fasting is the best spice ever. This is the best food I've ever had. Mm-hmm. Right. And it's the same thing with dopamine fasting, right? Where, okay, and I also write in the book about fasting from porn and how I tried to disprove the Taoist equations for living a long time, saying that guys should ejaculate less. Yeah. And it turns out if you ejaculate less, you like sex a lot more and you have a lot more of it. So there's something to be said for occasionally not getting what your body tells you need. And I promise you, as a guy, when you're there and you're about to have an orgasm, there is a voice in your head screaming very loudly, the best idea on earth and the most important thing in the world right now is for you to shoot your load, to put it in the medical terms. right? And there's another voice in your head going, I'd really rather not do that now because this is kind of fun. Let's go for another while. The voice in your head usually wins at a certain point. But when you master that voice in your head, it's the same kind of a thing. We're like, look, I don't need what I think I need, right? And that level of self-mastery, of separating out wants from needs, creates a lot of peace in your life. And I think dopamine fasting can help you create peace in your life because you realize you wanted it, but you didn't need it. And if you fell for the lie that you needed something that you didn't need, that creates stress.
Absolutely. That's such a great point too. And this is what I tried to, emphasize, because unfortunately the media misrepresented dopamine fasting as some sort of aesthetic or, masochistic thing where you avoid all stimulation. I was like, no, it's not about that. It's actually about having more fun and enjoyment, and really appreciating things properly. When you're not like, digitally addicted 24/7 and overstimulated, you can actually focus properly. You can actually have real conversations where you're actually engaged and you're not distracting yourself and staring at your phone, which really makes people feel disconnected. That's why I think, so many people are putting rules around put your phone away when you eat, when you're in meetings, all kinds of things, because we notice that it's kind of really disconnected people from one another.
You're right. You can have more connection when you're more present. And if you're constantly pulled in all sorts of directions via automated processes in your body, it's probably not the optimal place to be. And the fact the media misrepresented it, they're always going to do that. I was on the UK's largest talk show last week, 2 million viewers. And of course, the next day, crazy American entrepreneur has dangerous advice to skip breakfast. And here's people on Twitter saying, if I don't have breakfast, I might be mad. And so anytime they're talking about it, they're always going to do what they do. So I put on my Instagram page, which by the way is Dave.Asprey, very subtle plug there. But I put on like, guys, there's the breakfast mafia in the UK is strong. They're stalking Bulletproof media employees and throwing eggs saying, y'all got to eat your, so you just have to play with it, right? So of course the media is going to get it wrong. Their job is to get it wrong. Why? Because they're trying to trigger your dopamine. And that's just how they run. And once you know that, you're like, I see what you did there.
Exactly. That's what I wrote a follow-up piece to it. I was like, why the media lies to you about dopamine fasting? It's because they're dopamine dealers, in my opinion, right? They're like little drug dealers. And, their job is to write clickbait titles that are scientifically, inaccurate just to grab and steal your attention. And I think we're unfortunately in this digital war for attention. And if you really want to be a healthy, optimal being, you have to protect your attention very much. So on that note, why don't we wrap up? Dave, if there's anything that you want to plug, obviously, where can people find your book? Where can people find you? And any last words of wisdom?
All right. Go to fastthisway.com, sign up for the fasting training. I'll teach you my book for free. And it's like a 2-week program with videos and written materials and all kinds of cool stuff. And it's a gift. I'm not trying to sell anything. And the point there is, if I'm going to go to the trouble of spending thousands of hours writing a book, I'd rather you get the knowledge in the book because I think it's worth a couple thousand hours of my time. So fastthisway.com and pick up the book wherever you like to buy books. It's easy enough to do that. It's worth your time to read it. Otherwise, it's not worth writing. The best way to find me is probably Bulletproof Radio or on Instagram, Dave.Asprey.
Awesome. And hopefully we'll join you on Bulletproof Radio one day. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much for joining our podcast and obviously being a benefactor of our company. I think I just want to share a great deal of appreciation for being able to not only work with you, but to share your wisdom for our audience, introduce them to fasting, biohacking, and generally just optimizing their health in order to be a better, more effective man. So thank you again, Dave Asprey, and we'll follow up with show notes where we can our followers can find you and continue the conversation there.
Beautiful. Thanks, Cameron.